Multi-species ethnography, alongside other related posthumanist approaches, have prompted renewed attention in recent years to vegetal organisms as agentive persons and things, or what Lewis Daly calls botanical ontologies. In this paper, I explore how indigenous Marind in the West Papuan district of Merauke conceptualize oil palm, a plant that is proliferating across their lands in the form of large-scale monocrop plantations. I then examine the analytical import of Marind's conceptions of agribusiness and its effects for posthumanist theorizing. Like many other indigenous societies, Marind consider plants and animals to be animate and sentient entities with whom they entertain interagentive relationships. Over the last decade, the interspecies relations of Marind to their forest kin have been radically reconfigured by deforestation and the expansion of monocrop oil palm, an introduced plant that is widely seen and feared by Marind as a willful entity, one that is voracious, greedy, and alien. In one word, a killer palm. On the one hand, then, Marind and Merauke embody a post-human ethic in that they position themselves as one kind of self amongst a plethora of agentive life forms. Yet Marind are also grappling with a non-human being, oil palm, that is invasive and destructive. In this light, the efforts of multi-species ethnography to decenter the human and encourage practices of multi-species love towards other species as unloved others becomes problematic. It brings us into alliance with a plant whose proliferation does harm to a group of indigenous peoples who are themselves historical victims of racializing assemblages that discipline the category of humanity itself into full humans, not quite humans, and non-humans. When a particular group of people and their other-than-human kin are subjected to the damages and effects of a proliferating plant, we find ourselves forced to rethink violence itself in multi-species terms. The Marind communities amongst whom I carried out my fieldwork derive their subsistence primarily from hunting, fishing, and gathering in the forest. The interactions of Marind and their kindred plant and animal species in this environment are anchored in principles of mutual exchange and care. Plants and animals grow to support their human kin by providing them with food and other resources. In return, humans must exercise respect and perform rituals as they encounter plants and animals in the forest, record their stories, hunt, gather, and consume them. It is these reciprocal acts of care that enable humans and their other-than-human kin to partake in a shared community of life within the eco-cosmology of the forest. In contrast, oil palm's rapacious appetite for land and water is characterized by non-reciprocity and insatiability. Forest organisms are obliterated as vast swaths of forest are burned or felled and replaced with monocrop concessions dominated by a single plant. Oil palm gnaws away at the soil, leading to erosion, abrasion, and subsequent siltation. When a prolonged drought afflicted Merauke around 2015, young and old generations of Marind alike affirmed that this unprecedented event was caused by oil palm drinking up the wetness of the rivers, leaving humans, mangroves, and animals parched. Oil palm also pollutes watercourses with the effluents from the mills where it is processed. Underwater, riverine life forms become drunk on poison and suffer from eutrophication as oxygen availability is redirected from aquatic biodiversity to rapidly growing algae. Meanwhile, on land, the skin of terrestrial organisms rots away from irritations caused by pesticides that seep into the water they drink and bathe in. In the plantation, sounds of life are replaced by sounds of death: roaring bulldozers, gnawing chainsaws, the crackle of illegal burning, and the rumble of overloaded oil palm fruit trucks. Oil palm's insatiable greed is accompanied by a solitary mode of existence. My companions often contrasted the uniform landscape of monocrop plantations to the diverse flora and fauna of the forest, concluding that oil palm has few friends and likes to live alone. Indeed, few life forms are able to make a companion species of oil palm in agribusiness plantations that are characterized by low canopies, sparse undergrowth, low stability microclimates, high temperatures, and frequent chemical spraying. The conversion of natural forests to plantations also increases habitat fragmentation and biodiversity loss and forms impervious barriers to species migration. Oil palm is often classified by Marind as a foreign plant being because it was introduced from outside West Papua. The plant's expansion is imbued with political significance as the latest development in West Papua's long-standing history of top-down natural resource exploitation. Oil palm projects under the Merauke Integrated Food and Energy Estate, or MIFE for short, are largely designed and implemented by the Indonesian government and corporations without the free, prior or informed consent of indigenous Marind. Military corporate collusion is rampant. Many communities report being forced into land surrender deals in exchange for derisory compensation. Employment opportunities for local Marind in the palm oil sector are limited, as corporations prefer to bring in their own labour force or hire non-Papuan migrants. Many of my companions thus associate the foreignness of oil palm with their own ongoing colonisation by Indonesia, another foreign actor, and with the influx of non-Papuan settlers into West Papua. Agribusiness projects and the modernisation rhetoric surrounding them thus come to represent the botanical arm of a long-standing process of occupation rooted in the forceful incorporation of West Papua into Indonesia. Indeed, the promotion of oil palm expansion by the state routinely casts the forest-based livelihoods from which my companions derive their sense of collective identity in a negative light, as primitive and backward. Like the state, settlers and soldiers taking over Marind lands, oil palm is said to be both alien and invasive. It participates in the region's ongoing domination as the state's biological ally. Finally, many Marind affirm that with the arrival of oil palm, time has come to a stop. They point to the disappearance of forest organisms as evidence of this radical temporal rupture. For instance, as he walked through a raised sacred forest, Marcus, a village elder, noted how the call of birds marking the break of dawn and the fall of night had become rare. Hunting, fishing and gathering have become difficult because the times of fruit maturation and bird and animal migration have halted indefinitely. By imposing its monotime of homogeneous growth on forest life forms, oil palm thus averts the possibility of a meaningful present and concomitantly thwarts the shared futures of the forest's dwindling communities of life. Many Marind and Merauke attribute the destructive effects of oil palm expansion outlined above to the voracious and selfish nature of oil palm itself. But at the same time as Marind deeply resent oil palm for its devastating impacts and self-interested proliferation, many also express pity and compassion towards the plant in light of its own exploitation at the hands of humans, institutions, and machines. For instance, some Marind deplored the fact that every stage of the plant's growth is determined by human agents. The temporality of the palm's existence is subjected to countless biological and technological manipulations that regulate its development, form, and uses, from seedling to commodity. Oil palm is artificially bred through controlled pollination, and its yields are boosted with a range of chemical fertilizers to achieve corporate targets of production. Seedlings that fail to achieve yield targets and unproductive or diseased stands are systematically culled or felled. Meanwhile, oil palm seeds, my companions told me, are uprooted and transported far from their kin. They grow in sanitized plastic bags and industrial nurseries, rather than in their native ecologies. Many Marind described with sorrow how oil palm fruit are ripped away from their parents during harvesting and then unceremoniously flung into trucks like dead bodies. From driver of destruction to victim of human exploitation, oil palm thus accretes new and different meanings across the range of effectively charged discourses that surround it. Indeed, many of my companions expressed deep-seated curiosity about the origins, kin, and home of the foreign plant colonizing their lands, a plant whose unloving impacts Marind recognize may obscure loving relations that oil palm entertains with other life forms in other places. Multi-species scholars have highlighted the epistemic and ethical challenges involved in giving voice to species facing imminent annihilation in the contemporary era. Their analyses revolve around a shared concern, one aptly phrased by Matthew Trullu: how should we love in a time of extinction? In Merauke, Marind are struggling to sustain their relations with forest creatures whose survival, much like their own, is threatened by agribusiness. At the same time, the fraught experiences of Marind with oil palm suggest that to stay with the trouble of thriving yet destructive other than human entities, such as commodified plants, is perhaps an even thornier task. Here, taking love seriously in plant-human relations also requires taking seriously its effective counterparts: hate, pity, fear, and ambivalence. If giving moral consideration to plants is more appropriate than perpetuating their exclusion from moral purview, then attending to immoral and invasive plants, such as oil palm among Marind, that exclude other organisms from their life worlds, whilst themselves also being subjected to the violence of techno-capitalist machinations, becomes both necessary and challenging. In Merauke, the flourishing of oil palm involves violence, loss and suffering, inequitably distributed across particular plants and particular humans. In these tangled knots of life, non-humans are not always the victims, and humans not always the culprits. In this light, Matt Trulu's important question perhaps merits the awkward compliment of another: how and who should we love in a time of destructive, other-than-human proliferation? Palm people entanglements in Merauke provide two important insights on multi-species dynamics. First, not all life forms can or want to participate in reciprocal relations across species lines. In Merauke, the proliferation of oil palm violates the principles of mutual care that enable loving relations between Marind and their forest kin. Second, the incapacity or unwillingness of life forms to establish relations with each other is not solely nor necessarily a human prerogative. From the perspective of many Marind, oil palm is a vegetal form of significant otherness that refuses to participate in their pre-existing life world and instead appropriates the resources necessary to their survival only to sustain its own. In this light, assuming that humans are primarily capable of or responsible for violence against other than human life forms, as the notion of the Anthropocene often implies, runs counter to Marind's own conceptualizations of oil palm as a being of exceptionally detrimental effects and of themselves as its victims. To neglect this reality may limit our capacity to think about violence in multi-species terms in what might be perceived as yet another instance of human exceptionalism. Appreciating the role of plants as agents in our world, as proponents of the plant turn exhort, thus requires remaining open to the possibility of plants as destructive actors who also participate in the making of lively but lethal biocapitalist regimes. At the same time, it requires attending to how racially, historically, and politically imbued differences within the category of the human inflect situated humans' enactments and experiences of socio-ecological violence. In the human-plant entanglements of Merauke, some humans bear the palm in profit, whilst others must bear with. This paper has described oil palm from the perspective of a particular group of indigenous people in a particular place and at a particular point in time. Adopting a multi-sided approach and attending to the perspectives of other actors invested in one way or another in the life of oil palm may reveal that the plant is not entirely the antisocial creature that many Marind describe. For starters, oil palm has not always been cultivated under the ecologically exclusive monocrop model that, to many Marind, testify to oil palm's solitary and selfish tendencies. Second, whilst some among my companions pity oil palm for its totalizing subjection to the violence of human control, my own research in an oil palm plantation revealed that oil palm breeders and geneticists in fact become deeply emotionally invested in the seeds that they manipulate. And while Marind perceive oil palm as a self-interested being that refuses reciprocal relations with forest organisms, recent advances in ecological science point to diverse communities of flora and fauna that are finding ways to live in symbiosis with oil palm. In the rubble of capitalist landscapes, modest yet resilient menages of squirming arthropods, crawling invertebrates and flourishing fungi are discovering new fodder and futures in the company of oil palm. Whose reality matters more under such circumstances? How does one find a balance between the multiple and often contested realities of humans about other than humans and the realities of these other than humans outside of a human context across different places and times? Weaving together the dispersed ontology of lively capital like oil palm without doing violence to diversely situated and suffering beings is a matter of ethics and responsibility. As Donna Haraway notes, choosing which realities to follow is always an analytical, imaginative, physical, and political choice. It demands a transversal movement across realities that are cross-cut by entrenched asymmetries of power. It calls for strong objectivity that takes as its starting point the experiences and knowledges of the marginalized. At the same time, it requires attending to the highly heterogeneous ways in which indigenous communities themselves conceive of emergent capitalist natures. In Merauke, Marin conceptualized oil palm both as a driver of destruction and as a victim of human exploitation. Neither singular nor static, but rather perpetually in the making, their theories of reality about the plant transform in the light of new encounters, experiences, and knowledges. Finally, if ontic dispersion can help to characterize plant-human relations in Merauke, epistemic dispersion may help to apprehend the reality of oil palm in ways that draw from, yet also transcend, conventional anthropological methods. As humans, we will likely never be able to inhabit the life world of oil palm. The plant's Umwelt, in Jacob van Uexkel's terms, remains largely unknowable to us. However, we may deepen our understanding of the plant's dispersed ontology by means of an epistemic nomadism that brings into conversation diverse actors and knowledges towards a non-unitary vision of oil palm as plant, part, and product. One promising direction of research, for instance, might involve bringing indigenous conceptualizations of plants as animate beings into conversation with the budding science of plant cognition and intelligence. Another might revisit indigenous notions of vegetal agency through the optic of evolutionary niche construction, to explore how oil palm shapes its environment through consequential, if unconscious, modes of environmental engineering. Such approaches would explore the complex entanglements of knowing and being, invariably situated material and ethically charged practices of human-plant world-making. Certainly, navigating the politics of situated knowledges and other than human animacies in grasping the reality of oil palm will be challenging. Yet only by working transversely across these onto-epistemic divides will ways of understanding and relating to oil palm flourish, other and wisely. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to your questions, and in the meantime, please feel free to visit my website for more articles drawing from my research in Merauke that are available at my website www.morethanhumanworlds.com. Thank you.